Welcome to Everyday Torah. We're continuing on the Way of the Wanderer series. And Jacob, we went through Ephesians 4 last time, and I think we're going to continue on that track today. So what's the topic today?
So the topic today is, I don't know how to really articulate it. I'll come up with the title afterwards, but the idea is we are family. And what it means to be family in Messiah is so much more than this esoteric thing. I am convinced that if I were to wrong you, I would be wronging my brother. If I were to wrong Amy, I would be wronging my sister. If I were to wrong Gary, I would be wronging my brother. If I were to wrong Sharon, I would be wronging my sister. I think that we have turned this, we're all the family of God. But I don't think we actually get it. I think that's much more literal. I know it's much more literal than it's been taught. And so that's what I kind of want to look at today in greater detail.
Okay, so what you're saying is there's more of a weightiness to the concept of being a family of God than what we have, I guess, traditionally understood?
Yeah, I would say yes. And also the function of that family is radically more. I know that it says go forth and preach the gospel, right?
Mm-hmm.
To call those who are far off near, to proclaim the hope of the gospel.
Okay.
Right? The hope of the resurrection. And I think that by and large, for the last 2,000 years, there has been two things that have been done. You need to know the Lord. That's been proclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
And probably three things. There is a Lord to fear, a hell to avoid, and eternal life to lay hold of. I think that the quote unquote church has done these things. I do think that they have said those things.
Mm-hmm.
What we are not doing so good in is, what does that functionally look like? What does it mean to fear the Lord all of the days of your life and serve him only, right? The Shema, to love him with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Everything else is ancillary to that. And so I want us to look at, because there's so many different things. There's all these, there's these commandments, codified, if you ask a rabbi, they, 613 commandments, whatnot, really boiled down. You could probably reduce it to less, because a lot of the commandments kind of deal with things that we presently don't have to even deal with, like, for example, the temple or the tabernacle, right? Mm-hmm. So that list even gets further refined. If you don't own animals, it gets further refined. If you don't have a field that you garden or grow crops on, it further gets refined. So realistically, it's just not. It's more than just keeping commandments. Today is the spirit of keeping those commandments and what that looks like in the bond of peace of a family.
Well, let me tell you why I'm interested, because someone might be just clicking on this podcast and going, why do I need to continue to listen? Well, in a seminary class that I'm teaching right now, we're reading books that give frameworks that try to articulate the entire narrative of the Bible. And it does just a horrible job. So, for example, you have creation, fall, recreation. You see how wanting that is?
Yeah, pretty wanting.
Pretty wanting. There's a lot more to the story than that. Yeah. And I had a student email me and said, we've read differing frameworks, and some of them might have 4 or 5 categories. So they're a little bit more accurate. And I think everyone understands that these are fall woefully short of the narrative in some way. And I said, what you should do? Study Leviticus 23 for a year. And look at the framework that is outlined in that theologically, not just the days themselves or the practices or commandment themselves, but look at from beginning to end how that is playing out the narrative story of the whole Bible. And so I gave them my little thing in there about what that might look like, my 7 7 moves process. But even in that, I said, even in that, there is stuff in there that still needs to somehow be included. And this whole family thing about how we exist now in the context of those moves is real important.
Yeah.
And anyway, anyone who is listening today needs to know there is a reason to spend the next 50 minutes with you talking about this topic, because you and I both know that people can be very irritating.
Yeah.
Okay, brothers and sisters can irritate.
I can irritate, Traver. Did you know that?
On occasion, I've experienced this, as I'm sure I irritate people as well. And so, in other words, how do people want to deal with me when I am? Sometimes I'm off base, but then sometimes I'm on base, and can be irritating for all the right reasons.
Right.
You develop this family relationship where we can work through that.
Yeah, and I mean, a good framework to really look at that comes from Paul's guidance to Timothy, right? Where he says, how should you deal with older men, right? So this is 1 Timothy 5. So this might be a good way to look at the spirit of this. So 1 Timothy chapter 5, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him as you would a father. Younger men as brothers, older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, in all purity. Okay, so to codify earlier, I should be looking at Gary as a father. I should be looking at Sharon as a mother. I could look at you as an older brother, right? And look at Amy as an older sister. So that's the kind of relationship that Paul calls us to. And to your point, there's many ways that you could look at the all these meta narratives in the Bible, and scholars will try and find, this is the main meta narrative. I have looked at so many meta narratives and convinced I have yet to ascertain if there is a singular meta narrative, because there are so many meta narratives in the scriptures, and only Yah could weave them together the way he does. But family is a top 3 contender.
Okay, so for our listeners, do you want to define, or do you want me to define meta narrative?
Go ahead and let you define it.
Okay, so meta narrative just means the overarching story.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically it. I'd like to be
basically at the big picture. What is the strand that ties everything together, that if you were to pull that, the whole garment would come undone? And I think that family is a strong contender for that strand. But so anyhoozle, what I wanted to look at was specifically this concept of oneness. And this came out of a Shabbat conversation I had with Gary and Sharon and my wife when we were just looking at everything, and kind of a recap of what you and I had podcasted a couple of weeks ago. And this concept that Gary, you and him obviously podcasted on the Melchizedek priesthood extensively. And what I've come to see a lot through that teaching, I listen to those podcasts, and I've kind of gone back through my own notes, is this idea of what does God want for his people? What does he want for his body? And what are the ramifications of the soreg, or the dividing wall, as we talked about a couple of months ago now? What is the true...
You got to refresh everybody.
So the soreg being the dividing wall of hostility between Jew and Gentile, where it separated. And I won't get into the whole thing. You want to go back and watch the podcast on the dividing wall, but it's this idea that before Messiah, there is this big division that kept those who didn't know or were outside of the covenant community from interacting from those who were inside the covenant community.
Am I right off the top of my head that there was a little fence called a soreg?
Yes.
That, in the courtyard, the Gentiles could not go past that little wall.
Yeah, the Romans, they have a posted sign that basically the Romans said, look, we can't guarantee your safety. You go beyond this point. Like, so don't come crying to us if you get a shillelagh cracked across your head.
Now that part I didn't know.
Yeah. So, it's basically, if you cross that dividing wall and you were a Gentile, one outside the covenant, that's all Gentile means. You basically were taking your life into your own hands. And so in Messiah, that's no longer. There's one body, according to Ephesians 4:4. There's one body, one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that brings your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. And this isn't pantheism, right? Where we're talking about God is in the trees and we're going to paint with all the colors of the wind. And that's not a knock on, Pocahontas. This is not like, oh, God's in the microphone, that's pantheism, where God's like in everything. This is talking about the Spirit of God over all. He's working through all, and he is abiding in all of us. That's what this is talking about. So if that dividing wall is down and we truly can draw near to the sanctuary, something that hit me was that Jew and Gentile can now be brought near. But it's talking about the context of a sanctuary, right? Mm-hmm. That dividing wall of hostility. And so I thought, this has got to be Paul drawing from tabernacle language again, sanctuary language again, in more so than I initially thought, just looking at like the dividing wall, right? Because what are they being brought near to? Right? So that was the first thing. Well, what are they being brought near to? And it necessitates a means by which they may draw near. Because the sanctuary is holy ground. Not just anybody can go into the inner courts, let alone the throne. Right?
Yep.
So, and this is something that's lost on the believers nowadays, because we don't have the teaching element of the tabernacle, which is our loss, because I think we would truly have a greater understanding of holy space than we do now.
So you would be proud of me that I'm in the middle of doing a new course at the seminary, and sometimes I get a little hot-headed, or I don't know. I'm not sure if it's hyperbole or just prophetic truth that needs to be stated. But I've told students, because it's an intro to basically seminary. If you don't understand the tabernacle, by the time that you're ready to graduate, you really shouldn't graduate.
I agree with that.
So I put it out there. But could you explain for people, just to camp out on this concept for a moment? Yeshua dies, the curtain is rent in two. And I think the prevailing ethos of evangelical culture is, hey, he ripped it open. We can just like run in now.
Yeah, don't do that. That's a bad idea. So,
but why?
Why? Well, all we did was exchange high priests. Okay. So, and you, as you are right now, brother and sister, you can quote unquote boldly approach the throne of grace, but can you approach the one seated in the heavens? I mean, can you really? I mean, let's think about this for a second. Can you, Traver, just appear before the throne room in heaven right now? Can you truly approach the throne of grace in a physical form? Can you do that?
No.
Okay.
No.
So this idea that, you can go into the throne room. Can you though? I know it says now we can boldly approach the throne of grace, but this doesn't happen here, right? And that's something that we look forward to, Because Paul's whole thing in that boldly approaching the throne of grace is we do it in Messiah. It's all because we're in Messiah that we can do this, right? We are one body. And so he builds on this in Ephesians. So he's the one who can go on sacred ground. Why? Because he's the high priest, not through virtue of a sacrifice of a lamb or a bull or turtle doves or any of those, but rather by virtue of his own blood, he can boldly approach the throne. He was perfect. So he is able to enter into this holy space. And I thought to myself, he's enabling us, because later in Revelation, it will speak of, I will make them a pillar in the temple of my God. You will walk with me in white. You will be with me through, and it gives all this temple language, it gives Edenic language, etc. And so the thing that, people are like, well, what's this have to do with family? Trust me, I'm getting there. Just bear with us in love, because this is really important. Okay. And I started thinking in terms of what's required to be, at least in the Aaronic priesthood and Levitical priesthood, what was required to be able to approach holy ground. And I was like, well, let's take this back even one step further. What was the original plan? And I don't say original plan as in there was a plan B. It's just the way it originally was. There was, with Israel, a family selected. Okay. That family was redeemed from Egypt. And the entirety of the community, it says, if you will indeed obey my voice, then you'll be my people, I'll be your God. And then it would be a dedication of the firstborn that would serve God from all of the tribes. So there wasn't going to be an exclusive tribe. It was truly a family affair, because we think of Israel as a family with subdivisions of tribes that all share the same familial descent. So the original, and again, God doesn't have plan B. He knew this was going to happen, but as we see it in the scripture, the way it was going to be before the golden calf incident was a firstborn child served Yah in the context of a covenant community. And it would appear that the intent was that these firstborn would be a priesthood of firstborns, as it were. Then golden calf happens. Okay. So, but it's not to say that the Levitical priesthood wasn't actually intended before the golden calf. So if we actually were to look at, well, actually, no, I misspoke there. I said that backwards. The Levitical priesthood was a response to, if you will, to the golden calf. But the intent was always to have a quote unquote priesthood.
Thank you.
Okay. So, but what we see in Exodus 29, this is interesting. You go to Exodus 29, it says you're to consecrate the priests, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is what you should do. You'll consecrate them. They shall serve me as priests. You shall bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. So even here, verse 8, then you shall bring his sons and put coats on them, and you shall gird Aaron and his sons with sashes and bind caps on them, and the priesthood shall be theirs by a statute forever. But wait a minute. When does the golden calf happen?
Chapter 32.
So is the Levitical priesthood a response to the golden calf?
I'm going to still say yes, because what I'm seeing there is, did it, I don't have that text right in front of me. It doesn't say anything about Levites per se in that text, does it?
So what it says is that the priesthood shall be theirs, Aaron and his sons, by a statute forever. So this is referring to which priesthood? Is this referring to just being Levitical priesthood? Or is this talking about the office of the high priest?
Office of high priest.
There we go.
Aaronic
priesthood. There we go. So this is not talking about the Levites per se.
Right.
This is talking about Aaron and his sons. That's an important distinction. People don't see that distinction, but there is a distinction. Now, the thing that got me was this priesthood remains in the family. It doesn't ever leave the family, ever. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I started thinking about we don't have the Levitical priesthood, and by what I mean is the Aaronic high priesthood going on right now. Although Gary has touched on the fact that it looks like it will be re-implemented in the millennial kingdom for a time. But what struck me was that why does God have it so that only a certain family can be priests and participate in this? Because there's a distinction. You have high priest, priests, Levites, right? Not all Levites are priests. And this is something that's woefully misunderstood. You know, going back to your point earlier about talking about how you should have a requirement for this before you leave seminary. If you don't have a grasp of the tabernacle, I don't think you should be going to seminary. That's how important I think it is. If you don't functionally understand the tabernacle, you have no business going to seminary at all. At least a cursory understanding of it, because of the fundamental principles that you learn about why we're at where we're at. If you don't understand that, you have no business teaching. You just it's one of those foundational things that if you don't get it and then come back. But you can't go forward without a cursory understanding.
Well, just so you know, they're not being taught that in their churches. So
I know.
In the seminary, what can we do?
I was the weird one that read the tabernacle stuff, right? So that's why you and I always had good conversations in seminary. But I didn't know half as much as I should have known. So in the tabernacle, bringing this together, it's like, okay, Jake, what's the punchline? Here's a punchline. In the Torah, you had a family of priests ministering before the Lord, performing good works, and then teaching the people to abide in those good works, acting as intermediaries between God and the people. That's the Aaronic high priesthood. In Yeshua, in the Melchizedek order, it's still a priesthood contained within a family. Here's why. This is Hebrews 2, verse 13. So go ahead, and if you want to go to Hebrews verse 2 or chapter 2, verse 13. And this is one of those things, once I get through everything, people are going to go, well, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to go, well, yeah, have you really thought about the implications of this, though? That's really what it is. I want people to start thinking deeper about these things. I don't want them to just, oh, yeah, cursory. Well, I get it. Do you, though? So in 2:13, it's speaking about the supremacy of the Son up to this point in chapter 2. But here we have I'll start in verse 10. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers. In the midst of the assembly, I shall sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but the offspring of Abraham. Now, Paul is going to build this out in Galatians and in Romans, that those who are truly children of Abraham are those who are of faith. It's not good enough to be of physical descent. This was a fundamental failing of the Aaronic priesthood. By default, the oldest son becomes the next high priest. It is counterintuitive and runs antithetically to what we see throughout the Torah, where the firstborn almost never gets it because the firstborn is always a jerk. They don't deserve it. They shouldn't become the leader. They shouldn't be the one through who the promise comes. But the Levitical priesthood, I think at a deeper level, is actually being used by God to teach that righteousness doesn't necessarily come from a result of having the right name or being of physical descent. The Levitical priesthood was rife with corruption. As all you have to do is look at Judges, all you have to do is look at the kingdom period, corrupt priests. Sometimes there was righteous priests. You have Zadok, right? Sometimes you have righteous priests. But by and large, I mean, daggum, the end of Judges, you have a flippin' Levite who has a daggum concubine. What the heck is up with that? Right? So you have a corrupt priesthood. And God goes off on this in the prophets. Malachi, he's not happy with the priesthood in Malachi at all. So, and same thing with Ezekiel, not happy with the priesthood at all in Ezekiel. So what's going on here? We have this situation where you have a family priesthood in Aaron, but now in Melchizedek, we actually have a family priesthood as well. But it is not a priesthood based upon physical descent. It is a priesthood based upon the spirit of adoption. And what brings you into the family is the blood of the Lamb. What keeps you in the family is who is my mother, my brother, and my sister, the one who does the will of God. So the cool thing is that through Yeshua, this spirit of adoption, asking myself, who is my brother, my sister, and my mother? Those who do the will of God. It's no longer about this physical descent thing, and there's plenty of support proof texts you could use this for, such as Romans 8:15. So Romans 8:15, so we'll actually start with Romans 8:12. So then, brothers, we are debtors, not to the flesh, to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. The Spirit Himself bears witness with our spirit, and you could translate that the Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ, provided we suffer with Him in order that we might be also glorified with Him. So this is why Yeshua can say, to the one who endures, I'll give him the right to sit on my throne. Why? Because you're acting as a proxy, because you're in the family. But you have to be glorified to have that right. You have to be a good image bearer. Dad's not going to put just anybody on that throne, folks. He's going to put somebody that hollows his name. So if you think for 1 second you can live your life as you want and then think I can boldly approach the throne of grace, no, you're not. You're going to get struck dead by a daggum lightning bolt. You're going to die just like Nadab and Abihu. You're going to be struck dead. Why? Because you don't understand holiness. And what is important for us is to take this to the next level in the book of Ephesians, to understand we are family. We really need to understand that we are a royal priesthood. But this isn't esoteric in a non-relational box where we're in Messiah, but we don't really need each other. No, we're family. That's how deep this goes. We need each other. This is the whole thing about the gifts. And this is why I think that Paul organizes Ephesians in the way he does, because what he's trying to get to is that you guys are one. And it fundamentally changes everything when you're one. So in summary, and then I want your feedback on this. In summary, we have a new priesthood that is a familial priesthood where we all are able to abide as priests in the sanctuary. And what we become is a new set of intermediaries that minister to the outside world, but we still go through the high priest. It is he who has access until we attain to the fullness of the resurrection. Then at that point, we are able to, quote unquote, boldly approach the throne. But it's just this idea that, and John builds on this too, John chapter 1, verse 13. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, and I mean, I'll even go back. Verse 11, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So I want people to start thinking of this body that we are a part of. We are a body together. We are a family, but we're a family of priests. That ups the ante in how we should be interacting with one another in holiness when you start to think of yourself as a priest.
Okay. Before I do any feedback stuff, I don't think that you've actually read the text from Ephesians 4 where you've couched the whole argument. So could we look at that first?
Yeah.
And you expand on it however you'd like to.
Yeah. So in the previous podcast, we had discussed how what's going on in Ephesians 4 is drawing back to a Psalm 68 and the construction of the tabernacle. That when he ascended, he received gifts. And we went into this whole thing, right? So, yeah. But Gary and I hashed this out, and I proposed to Gary, I said, what's really going on here is that word that's in the Greek here could actually be received gifts in like order to give gifts. It's like reciprocal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what's going on is Paul is trying to describe the body in terms of the first Exodus. So what happens after the gifts are received and then returned to the people? The tabernacle is built. Okay. So with that tabernacle being built, what establishes that tabernacle and its ministry is the priesthood. Okay. But it's being linked together. There's almost an overemphasis on each of the pieces of the partitions being linked together. And then Paul talks about this stature of the fullness of Christ, that we're being built up, right? And it talks about the body itself being a temple, with Yeshua being the chief cornerstone. And that word temple is not correct. It's actually sanctuary, which will have to be another podcast. But we're being built into a holy sanctuary bit by bit. Okay. So the connection here is that Paul's trying to get the people to realize they're being prepared for the works of service as a priesthood. That's what he's trying to get people to understand. That's what's underneath the whole thing, is the Melchizedek priesthood.
Underneath this video, I'm going to put a link to Brad Scott's discussion of the tabernacle. It's like 20 parts, but at least it'll be available to people so they can learn about the tabernacle, about its parts. And in that, Brad does a good job of talking about those fasteners. And so there's some overlap going on here that'll give people a fuller picture for those that can digest large amounts of information, but it will be there. And let me ask a couple of questions here and just reflect with you. First of all, I get this image of a priest as this intermediary, and what they do is their kind of sole function is to help the people of God, in some sense, be ritually pure, and to bring them into a relationship with God, the Mishkan, into relationship with the kingdom of God in such a way that is right, good, and holy. Now, to step back further, we have Moses, and Moses is this intermediary. And the reason that it seems to me that Aaron comes into the picture is Moses is uncomfortable with his ability to speak well, which I kind of identify with. But anyway, God gets kind of miffed at him and has Aaron come alongside him. I've always asked the question, was the high priesthood, was it kind of sort of supposed to be established through Moses and not Aaron? Is there anything going on there that I should be reading into that you've thought about that, or is it just you always working with what you always got?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. But isn't it interesting? I wonder if that's a possibility. However, Moshe still serves as a type, because Messiah is like Moshe in that he doesn't have children of natural descent that take after and do as he does. So Moshe instructs the people and he has his own children, of course, but the emphasis is that he is a leader of his people, that he's teaching his people to follow after the Lord his God and to serve the Lord as he serves the Lord. And that's not through natural descent per se. So I think that you get an archetype with the idea of adoption there, in a way, as a shepherd leads his flock. And so I don't know that it could have been established through Moshe, because, I mean, what does Yah say to Moshe several times? Get away from these people so I can destroy them and I'll make you a nation.
That does kind of say that.
So, they're not exactly batting 1,000 when it comes to that. So, yeah, I think that it's a possibility. That'd be a great question to ask. I think that we would have to, and you know this, but I think we'd have to resort to mere conjecture on whether or not that is what could have occurred. But it's a possibility, because Moshe, and here's another thing, Moshe was a Levite. He's from the tribe of Levi. So, yeah, you kind of wonder.
Okay, so I do know that we have also this idea of the Behor. So what is the real firstborn? Is it the one that's born physically, or is it the one that carries on the the name, the character of the father and mother. So I know that we have that sort of working in the line of Scripture. Now that said, when you have the Levites and the Levitical priesthood, the reason that they are put in that place is because they stand up for righteousness. They in effect become the Behor because they it's not about physical descent. It is about who is going to walk in the way of righteousness and who's going to stand up for that. And the Levites did. So then,
that's Numbers 3:45, by the way, and Numbers 3:12 is that the Levites take the Levites instead of all the firstborn amongst the people of Israel.
Couldn't have fired off the address like that, but maybe you just did a quick search. I don't know.
Google's helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we have the Levites functioning in that their role is to be facilitators of the Mishkan, the tabernacle, and they bring their family members into a relationship with Yahweh through that. And they function, it seems to me, the idea is that they're functioning as brothers and sisters. I want to say in Messiah, but kind of in Messiah, because somehow Messiah is present in all that. Now, what's important for me at this juncture is that a lot of times when we're reading Ephesians 4 and we're looking at apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, evangelists, people tend to put those roles in the context of church governance, administration, and it becomes a 501c3 vibe to it. And that's not the intent. The intent is more, it's family. It's these fathers, grandfathers,
brothers, uncles.
That's the feel.
But here's the thing. It's more than that too, because we see that Philip's daughters were prophetesses. And there's nothing that says that a woman cannot be a prophetess. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say she can't be an evangelist. There's qualifications on who a woman can or cannot teach, according to Paul.
Right.
But the whole thing is authority based.
Well, I'm thinking about Deborah and Deborah's palm.
Yeah.
So they came to Deborah, obviously a female.
Yeah.
She is a mother in the Lord who knows the Torah, and they're coming to her effectually to be judged. Can you help us determine, Deborah, what is right and good before the Lord? And so she applies as a mother in the Lord, applies the Torah to her family members. And so it doesn't,
with her husband.
We see
her
men and women doing
together. Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. I mean, Phoebe's called a deaconess in Romans, so you got to do something with that, right?
Yeah,
it's there. Go read at the end of Romans. It flat out calls Phoebe a deacon. So,
I think a part of the vibe that you're getting at here today is how important it is to understand the familial family structure and vibe in. We almost, I think there's a connotation in our congregations of pastor, elder, and then, if you get into organizational structures, executive pastor and youth leader.
There's a bifurcation. And this is the exclamation point on the whole thing that gives me the goosebumps. The trajectory of all of this is that from the beginning, what Yah wanted was his family to be the priesthood that represented him to creation. What is Adam called in Luke's gospel? The Son of God. Adam receives a title that he is a son of the Most High. We also have these other beings in the heavenlies referred to as the sons of God. And tragically, there was a rebellion that took place on the earth and in the heavens, Genesis 3 and Genesis 6, where this got screwed up. You have the family on earth rebelling, but then you have the family in the heavenlies rebelling. And so the thing that blows my mind, the more and more I look at these things, is what does God do through Messiah? He's been slowly teaching us through his Torah. The intent, and the intent is he wants a people, he wants a family, right? Because he does everything on a familial level. He wants a family to represent him to the creation. That's what he wants. And so you tease this out through the Levitical priesthood and it fails. Why does it fail? Because it's an inheritance based upon natural descent. But it is the one who does the will of the Father who is in heaven that's a part of the family according to Yeshua. So now what you have is in the Melchizedek priesthood, we don't see it fully yet. We kind of act like Levites in this life in that we can't necessarily get into the sanctuary, but in Messiah, we are in the sanctuary. But what's the end game? The end game is the reconciliation of things in heaven and things on the earth, and our glorification as sons, so that we can step into the fullness of a glorified royal family that is a priesthood that then teaches the peoples, the nations, and reflects his glory and his majesty to all of creation. But it is played out on the earth so far in this microcosm. But what the Father wants, I am convinced of this. The Father wants his whole family to be priests involved in the administration of the creation.
Okay, I want to reflect again a couple things here because I'm starting to more feel the force of the family dynamic that would be present in Ephesians 4. You know, I'm a son, and my dad is we're going to classify him as a righteous, godly man, and I need to be an adequate reflection of my father for the rest of my family. I'm a firstborn, actually, because that's true. Just from a familial perspective, it is important that I carry on my father's traditions and my father's my thought. You know, he's just taught me things. One of the things being, hey, Trav, the sun always rises, because I've gone through a lot of hard stuff in my life, and my dad would text me almost every day. Look at the sun has risen. In other words, life goes on. Yahweh is faithful in the midst of my difficulties, but there's an ethos that my dad brings to my family. That I need to bring that ethos to my family, and also the practical things that my father has taught. So there's this, when we talk about priesthood of believers, I do think that phrase falls short, because I think people always couch that in terms of the Levitical priesthood, and it feels so mechanical. And if you don't know what's going on in the tabernacle, you lose that there's just a God longing for a family with sons and daughters.
Yeah. And we all become sons. And that's the thing, is that the history, people think of these things in terms of male, female in this life. And they say, well, God views women as less than. In the resurrection, what does Yeshua say? They're not given in marriage. They're like the angels that remained in heaven. And then what does it say? Paul says, in Christ, there is not male or female. Jew or Gentile, slave or free, for you are all one. Right? So this, what happens at the resurrection, no eye has seen this or can truly comprehend yet. But what was originally in the Garden of Eden was Adam, a human.
Mm-hmm.
And that was teased out into two different parts, right? But in the resurrection, what's going to happen? This, in your resurrected body, in other people, in females' resurrected bodies, that's, in my opinion, probably going to get a whole bunch of people that are going to say I'm saying something I'm not. This bifurcation ceases to exist because the language is consistent across the entirety of the scripture to attain the adoption as sons. What happens is humanity in the resurrection, those who attain to the resurrection, go to a position that even exceeds that of Adam, where we are all sons. So it's because it's a females were not allowed to be priests. They just weren't. It was the sons of Aaron, and that's another type and a shadow. So it's not that females are inferior in any way, shape, or form. We all have the same inheritance, but it has to work its way out in his manifold wisdom. He has decided to play it out the way he's decided to play it out on this planet, right? Because it's all about family. And what is the one God desired? Godly children. That's what he wants. He wants a family of priests. And at the culmination of all things, at the resurrection, he's going to get that first harvest of sons that will serve before him night and day as his ministers to the nations and bring the Torah to the ends of the earth. And then he gets a second harvest at the end of the millennium. And then at that point, the son says, I have brought the children you have given to me, Father. We are a family now, as you wanted from the beginning, to serve you faithfully as priests all of our days. Here's the kingdom. This is what you wanted. What do you have for us? And we all throw our crowns at the throne and marvel, because Father is now over all and in all, and we get to see what the Father has planned. I mean, no eye has seen or ear heard what God has planned for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. We don't get to see beyond the veil. That's the end of all speculation. It is purely speculation after Father arrives as to what he has planned for his family. It's this mind. And so these petty things that we have now within the body, these stupid things, if you backstab somebody in the family of God, if you're damaging an assembly in the family of God, if you're taking your brother's wife, if you're leading people astray in debauchery, you're doing this to your own family. And we would all look at each other and go, oh my gosh, incest, that's terrible. But functionally, what you're doing when you wrong your brother or your sister is you are wronging your own family member in the Lord. And that's especially heinous because you all claim the same Father. So these are things that I want us to think more deeply about when it comes to the priesthood, because we all like I'm part of the priesthood. Yeah, but do you act like it? Like, do you really act like you are occupying sacred space right now in the heavenlies? Are you really acting like that? And furthermore, if you're teetotaling or dabbing in Torah, this is the rebuke again. I hit a rebuke last week. I'll hit the rebuke again. Can anything unclean come into sacred space?
No.
No. So if you're a family of believers and we're all seated with Messiah in heavenly places, administrating in the tabernacle through him, are you going to defile your body in such a way that would prevent you from being able to occupy sacred space?
I don't want to.
That's
People do it all the time.
People do it all the time. It's a really bad idea, because what you're effectively doing, and this is just the easy one. Do you think God would have been okay in Israel if a priest had walked through the gates into his sanctuary chomping on a pork chop?
No.
No. In no way, shape, or form. At all. It just, there's no way. And here's something, I guess the final thing, and maybe next week we'll get to this. Daniel 7. We'll go down to, let's see here. Because the day's drawing near. Like, people can say I'm crazy, whatever. So Daniel 7, verse 25. We're speaking about the fourth kingdom and for the beast system itself. Okay. He shall speak words against the Most High, and he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Brothers and sisters, for those of you who think that the law is not effectual in this administration, why on earth would it speak negatively of the lawless one as changing the law if the law wasn't supposed to be in effect?
Because in Hebrews 7, there is a change of law. And you and I both know that that's not what that means. But I'm just going to I'm being the other side for a second here.
And Gary addressed that in the Melchizedek series where it's a change of administration.
That's right. We have a new high priest and the order of Melchizedek. Yep. And the only change of law is in relation to the new high priest.
Bingo. Had
no effect on any of the other laws. It is only a replacement of the Levitical priesthood with the Melchizedekian priesthood, of which you are a priest, a family of priests, a kingdom of priests in that priesthood. And don't put pork in your mouth or dishonor our father's Shabbat. Or move your boundary markers. I mean, go. And this is where I wasn't getting to earlier, Jacob, or maybe I wasn't getting to my point fast enough, is when people come to seminary or just we talk about discipleship, and a lot of people are not, well, I'm not going to be a pastor, or I'm not going to be paid as a career person because I don't speak well or whatever. I'm like, okay, everyone's figuring out that, first of all, some of that's a big sham. But second of all, your role to carry on your father's righteousness in your family is a really big deal. You perpetuate your father's holy days. You want to know how to disciple nations? Walk them through the narratives of holy days. You think Christmas and Easter has discipled people? You're darn right it has. And that is perpetuating a narrative of a different kingdom when you, as a father and mother, you perpetuate your father's holy days, your father's holy ways. Then you are being a priest in a familial sense, and your children and your grandchildren are walking in that. And I want to give a shout out to my sister, because she doesn't have kids that are walking in that. And so she is adopting other kids to raise and to help them walk in that, because there are people that are hungry for mothers and fathers that will treat them in such a way that they feel the priesthood. They feel their Father in heaven in a tangible way to walk them through these traditions of our God. And I say traditions, but I mean the ways of our God.
Yeah.
Oh,
and it's so next week or next time rather, because it won't be next week, but the next time we podcast, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, I think, wrap the Way of the Wanderer series, because I don't want to belabor the point.
yeah.
But I'm going to take us through the book of Numbers. And I am going to show how the book of Numbers is a prophetic foreshadowing of what happened when Yeshua arrived to deliver his people, and we have now been wandering for 2,000 years.
You know how many chapters Numbers has, right?
I'll do it in 30 minutes.
You just made a. You're going to do all of Numbers in 30 minutes.
I'll give the punchline in 30 minutes, and here's why. The whole thing, and John does this beautifully. When he compares it, because the whole book of Numbers is all it is doing is foreshadowing the current wilderness wanderings, because it was 40 years. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeshua, we're told in the book of Hosea that after 2 days I shall raise them up again. So if you take the prophetic calendar of 2,000 years, Israel was supposed to receive Messiah as a jubilee. They didn't. And now we've been wandering for 40 cycles of 50 years. In my opinion, it's a punishment just like what Israel got. 40 years for not accepting. And so now what we're going to see, I'm going to show it. I think it's a good way, because the goal of Numbers is to reach the promised land, right? Mm-hmm. And what a disaster it is in the interim. So that's going to be the wrap of the Way of the Wanderer series, is demonstrating how Numbers prophetically foreshadows what has happened for the last 2,000 years and how it's going to end.
Okay, well, look what you have to look forward to. Friends, you are a priesthood of believers, and we should all take our roles in a family sort of way. And wherever you are, just know that your job is to know your Father in heaven. Your job is to take your Father's instruction and to embody it and to teach it to others and bring them into that by way of God's instruction. And when you do that, you're functioning in a firstborn sort of way. And to not move too far from what Jacob was saying earlier, that when we wrong our brother and sister, because and this is where I'll leave it, is that when you read the feast days, not in Leviticus 23, but in Leviticus, you get this feel that there's got to be justice, goodness, rightness in the context of community. So it's kind of like, hey, do the feast days, walk in God's righteous laws. But if you're not doing it in the context of family and everyone's being cared for and loved, and we treat each other right, it's kind of like a no-go. It's all got to work together. So I am just, I'm happy to continue to, Jacob's not arrived, nor have I, but to seek our God every day and walk in that Torah every day of our lives. That's what we want to be about. We're glad that you're with us. That's why we call it Everyday Torah, and we'll see you next time.